So today's event is about technology transformation for public good, role of AI automation to address societal challenges. And I'm very pleased that Riccardo from the Cabinet Office has taken the lead on this. He's a senior economist in the Chief Economist team at the Cabinet Office, and his work involves contributing to supporting the Prime Minister's private office and the effective running of the UK government. Well, that's a pretty good job to have, very impressive. And I imagine he's very busy at the moment. So he's contributing to cross-governmental analysis on public sector productivity and the analysis for the newborn cross-government body, Government Automation Task Force. So he's got a wealth of experience, and he's drawn on his extensive contacts to put together this fantastic panel. And I'm now going to hand over to Riccardo, and thank you very much to Riccardo and to the panel.
Indeed. Thanks, Ellen. Morning all, and great to have you all here. I have indeed the great pleasure to chair today a fascinating debate, I hope. The goal for today will be to try to give a snapshot on the uptake of technology of specifically artificial intelligence automation in the UK, and how this technology were actually used for good. And later we will explain what actually we mean for this. So today we are very lucky because we can get insights from a very broad range of perspectives. We have guest speakers from the private as well as from the public sector. Personally, I will find it useful to hear more about three specific elements, because there were a lot of workshops on artificial intelligence especially, but I think there are three main things that hopefully are quite original about this debate today. So the first one will be to try to break the generic hype on AI and automation, but actually try to provide a real-world example. We know that the scenario with general AI or robots that would be able to steal all the jobs is still very, very far in the future, while the reality, based on a lot of reviews, is that today adoption is suboptimal and needs to be incentivized. A second point that will be interesting to know a bit more is related to the key difficulties, the challenges around the adoption of this technology. We know UK is a leading country in developing AI and automation, as well as the related public policy. But still, we know there are many implementation challenges that slow down significantly the adoption of this technology in the private as well as in the public sector. And the third element that I would like to hear a bit more is the 1 million questions. So to try to have some views on what can be done, what mechanism actions could be put in place to ensure that this technology, fantastic technology, can be actually used for good, meaning being inclusive with the human employees, be targeted to tackle societal challenges, for example, climate change. So it would be really, really great to hear views on this. So now I'm going to present the guest speakers for today. In order of presentation, we have Harry Rhys-Davies, that is the AI program lead at TechNation and previously head of investment at Wire UK. TechNation is this organization that I think does a very important job. It's a government-backed program that supports the scale-up of startups in AI. Previous example of startups include Skyscanner, Monzo, and Servest. We have also great pleasure to have Mark Hodgson, that is the Chief Business Officer at Servest itself. Previously, Mark has also led several international commercial operations for global technology companies, including Microsoft and Google. Just a few words on Servest. Servest is this fascinating, I think, venture capital-backed climate intelligence platform that use AI and machine learning to help organizations easily understand and measure and predict physical climate risk on all their assets. And finally, we have from the Cabinet Office, Julia Beresford and Lara Hayes were respectively Deputy Director and Senior Implementation Advisor for the Government Automation Task Force. Julia has just recently joined the Cabinet Office from the Ministry of Justice, where she performed a number of roles, including Head of Tech Project Delivery and Head of Digital and Technology Customer Services. Lara works already in the Automation Task Force since 8 months and been in the Cabinet Office for 6 years. And before, she worked in the public sector consultancy. Just briefly, and we are going to hear more, but Government Automation Task Force is this relatively new and I think ambitious team within the Cabinet Office that was set up to develop and accelerate the government automation agenda. And it would be very interesting to hear more about this. So now, before giving the words to the guest speakers, I think you just mentioned we aim to have a Q&A session in the second part of the workshop. For the audience, I suggest to keep questions at the end of the 3 presentation. In case you would like to ask a question, please use the chat box on the bottom the right, including which guest speaker you would like to cover your question. And then in the meanwhile, please mute your mic. So let's kick off, and now hand over to the first one is Harry, who will talk about the role of TechNation and showcase, I think, a few examples of work done by AI startups. Thanks.
Brilliant, thank you. Let me share my screen as well as we go. So, thanks. Oh. So I hope technology doesn't fail me. Brilliant. Can you see that's okay, Riccardo? Could take a few seconds to load there.
Yeah.
How's that?
Yeah.
Perfect.
That was great.
Right. Good afternoon, everybody. Pleasure to be here. I'm going to talk a little bit about TechNation, what we do, and how it relates to AI. And I think the first point to note here really is, I suppose, so much of the debate and the discussion on AI focuses very much on big tech, on Google, Facebook, Microsoft, governments, or what have you. Actually, so much of the adoption of AI and so much of the implementation of AI really depends upon startup companies, startup tech companies, those that are really using artificial intelligence in small teams and working on very specific problems. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well too. And I'm delighted to have Mark here. I think Mark will really bring this to life in a second. TechNation, for reference, is a government-backed body, as Riccardo says. We were set up in the David Cameron era, really to support and champion UK technology, and specifically entrepreneurs who are using technology as well at the heart of what they do. And I'll show you a few examples of that through the presentation as well. Our mission really is to unlock the growth potential of 1,000 scaling companies over the course of the next few years. So really looking for increasingly more UK success stories like companies like Skyscanner or Zoopla or what have you. We really want to see UK tech really at the fore, really across the globe. We're led by a steering committee of entrepreneurs, so people who've really walked the walk and have been through the journey of scaling a tech company. And some of those you'll recognize, like Stephen Kelly, for example, was the CEO of Sage. People like Priscilla Lobo was head of people at Microsoft, specifically focusing on AI. So very much, I suppose, led by tech entrepreneurs to support tech entrepreneurs. And we do it through a number of different mechanisms. We run the Exceptional Talent Visa Scheme. So very much trying to fast track, if you like, or endorse technology leaders to come and work in the UK in a UK startup. And that's an endorsement route signed off by a panel of judges, venture capital investors, founders, etc. We run skills and an academy of skills for anybody looking to work in tech. We run an annual report on the state of technology, which will be the latest of which will be due to be coming out in Q1 next year. And we run a series of programs which support startups directly. They're very much peer networks for founders. And I won't go into the specifics in this presentation, but you can ask afterwards if helpful. And you'll see there's a specific focus on AI. And we very much try and look at areas that are strategic to the UK. And I very much focus on AI and what we do. Now, we've put about 2,000 companies through these programs to date, many of which you'll recognize. So your companies like Monzo, Just Eat, Deliveroo, Darktrace, Skyscanner, We're really trying to fly the flag for UK tech, and delighted to have Sylvester as well along today, which is another great example. 9 IPOs within that, and we've processed now about 3,000 visa schemes for people to come and work in technology in the UK. So I focus very much on AI, which is a free program to support UK entrepreneurs using AI at the heart of what they do. And I'll talk a bit about the program, but I think I'll spend a bit more time highlighting the sorts of use cases that we see. And I hope that brings to life really the sorts of entrepreneurs and the sorts of companies out there that are using AI for societal good, and ways that might overlap with your work as well across government too. The first thing to say is, I suppose, COVID-19 aside, actually, this trend really continues despite COVID-19. I think 2021 will be another great year for AI investment. But the one takeaway from this slide ultimately is that the UK really is a world-leading ecosystem, I would say, certainly behind the US and China, but really ahead of everything else when it comes to the growth and the scaling ability of entrepreneurs that are using artificial intelligence. We really see now, I suppose, a real golden age, I think, of lots of different actors coming together specifically to focus on artificial intelligence and other deep technologies across the UK. And some of those are very university-led. Some of those are led by organizations like DeepMind, of course, who had an amazing breakthrough the other week. But we also see now a plethora of AI-focused venture capital investors. This is so important when it comes to AI adoption and entrepreneurship and putting AI at the heart of the UK economy. We really need investors, we really need entrepreneurs to be able to grow and start and scale a company in the UK. And we're starting to see the building blocks of an ecosystem that does that really, really effectively in a way that really is at the moment unparalleled anywhere outside of China or the US. And we're starting to see now, I think, increasing examples of companies that are already making it. And I mentioned DeepMind, which of course was acquired at Google, but originated and is still based in King's Cross in London. And we're seeing now companies like Graphcore, Tessian, Tractable, companies you may not have heard of yet, given what they do. But these are really globally competitive companies that have AI at the core of what they do. When we talk about the implementation of AI, and these are really the companies at the heart of doing exactly that. You know, Graphcore, for example, is really building through their artificial intelligence-focused design chips. They're really building the infrastructure and the tools that will really power artificial intelligence in the future. So we're really, I think, seeing the shoots of what is a very strong ecosystem around AI in the UK. My focus very much is about supporting founders reach that sort of level of scale. And we still see lots of hype in the space, but we're still wanting to do more where we can to support companies get to the likes of Skyscanner or Deliveroo and become household names. So my program is part of the UK government's AI and data sector deal, which was launched by Dame Wendy Hall a few years ago. And we're all about supporting companies like Marks, which you'll hear from in a second, really to become the sorts of companies that I mentioned on a previous slide, you know, really to see companies grow and scale and fly the flag for UK tech. All of our companies are selected by a panel of judges. So some of those are in government, so like Sana, the head of the UK Government Office for AI, Tabitha, who heads up the UK Government AI Council, but then really a mix of AI founders, investors, people in the ecosystem, who really, I suppose, can convene a network around these entrepreneurs and really champion what they do. And what it is, I suppose, we run a series of 6-month programs. It's all free for entrepreneurs, and it's really about how do we share experiences across leadership teams? How do we really, I suppose, get across what best practice looks like together as a peer group across things like sales, fundraising, people, culture, etc. Very much focused on really the building blocks of building a successful company that just so happens to have AI at the core of what it does. And really, I suppose, as well as doing that in a peer setting, we also have people come back and share their experiences of what it really takes, I suppose, to scale a company in this space. So yesterday, for example, we had Mark Logan, who's the CEO of Skyscanner, coming into a talk on how do you grow operations in a company. Dave Palmer, the co-founder of Darktrace, did the same for how you build a product at an early stage. And so really it's about how do we pull out best practice from those entrepreneurs that have done it already, and how do we pass that on to the next generation of founders who are looking to emulate the same. We've got a mix of companies across a lot of different sectors, actually, and we've just recruited our latest cohort of companies across the UK, importantly. and a number of which I'll mention, but they fall within a number of different sectors, and lots this year, as you see, in construction, pharma, healthcare, etc. And it's a real range of companies using AI in their products. We've got companies like Kyla's, Grey Parrot, and they're very much focused on using artificial intelligence and computer vision for reducing waste. And you can see in this example, how they're using artificial intelligence to really categorize different types of plastic and wastes, such that it can be sorted by an automated machine like a robot. And there's a huge inefficiency in recycling, even in 2020. And Grey Parrot is a mechanism and a means to drastically change that if we want to move towards net zero. We support companies as well like Arcturus. So this is very topical at the moment as we look for treatments and drugs that tackle all sorts of things like COVID-19. But they very much have, for example, an AI robotics platform based in Cambridge that does all of the manual work of needing to run experiments and science experiments for drug discovery completely in an automated sense using AI and robotics. And you can just imagine just what more you can do when you have science experiments running 24/7 manually and remotely without people needing to be in the office all the time. You can get a lot done very quickly. So platforms like this can completely democratize drug discovery. They can drastically lower costs, but they can also massively increase effectiveness as well in terms of what we can output for patients. We've got a lot of companies like ILOF, so they're very much looking at personalized medicine, for example, and we're much using cutting-edge artificial intelligence to look at how we granularly come up with treatments and cures for very specific diseases. They're starting with Alzheimer's, for example, and using artificial intelligence to look at breakthroughs there. And we also have then another big focus on things like disinformation online. So Logically is a company and a startup that stems from Yorkshire. And it's actually the world's largest fact-checking team. And they use AI as a core part of what they do as well. So they were on BBC Click recently demonstrating their platform being used in the recent US presidential election. So very much topical and very much something that AI really has a deep say in. And then the same for Vector as well too. So this is a company that's using artificial intelligence to automate paperwork, which you can imagine now, of course, given what's about to happen on the 1st of January with customs and what have you. Artificial intelligence solutions have a massive input there to look at how do we automate this to make it much more efficient at scale as well too. I won't go into this now, but you can ask me about some of the challenges that we see across the board later on if we have time. And I'll just leave you with these thoughts. I think it's an exciting time for artificial intelligence, specifically to solve very specific challenges, certainly for society. And I think we're seeing lots of the innovation here driven by startups, despite a lot of talk about Google, Facebook, etc. And I think, as I said, I think the UK is very much ahead of where we are in Europe. But still a long way to go, I think, before we get to China and the US. I can talk a little about that if of interest. I'm past my time, so I'm going to hand over to Riccardo and then to Mark. But I hope that's been interesting for you this afternoon.
That's great. That's great. And to be honest, it's nice to hear such an interesting example of AI, how actually can help society, public services, and from different angles. You just mentioned also potential challenges. Maybe that is one of the backup questions that we'll ask later. But just nicely linked with TechNation, we can just introduce the presentation of Mark that from Cerberus. Cerberus, as I said, was one of those startups that worked with TechNation in the past. So Mark, I think, was going to talk about and cover what Cerberus does and how AI can actually help tackle climate change risk. And over to you, Mark.
Oh, Mark, you're just muted. Let me see if I can.
Hi, yeah, no, I just want to quickly share my screen.
Right.
Sorry, guys, can't find the button. Harry, how did you do it?
So is that this is sort of a square and arrow in the bottom right there. If you click on that and then click on share application screen at the top there.
I don't see a button. Sorry, I'm really.
So if you go to share files, you should
If you
find
want to
your
share
slide
your
pack.
screen, Mark, are you on the bit at the bottom with the square with the arrow in it?
No, I've got a purple arrow, open collaborate panel.
Yeah, click
In
on
there?
that,
Yeah.
and then you click on the square with the arrow in it.
Yep. Great. Done.
Great.
There we go. All right, everyone. Let's try and do this.
A bit of suspense is useful.
Okay. All right. So hopefully you'll be able to see a screen right now. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
Okay.
great.
So, thank you very much. Another collaboration tool I'm still going to have to learn. My apologies. Yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here, first and foremost, everyone. And thank you very much for inviting me to really discuss the transformative application of artificial intelligence for the public good and for government at large. And for me, that's all about the application of artificial intelligence in climate and how and where that applies, I think, to government and wider society. In short, we are witnessing the early signs of global level transitions towards an economy and society which finally, I believe, has a chance to slow down and possibly reverse the long-term decline in the health of this planet. And I believe that government, as many of you will believe, government has a fundamental role to play in enabling, in promoting, even enforcing economic and social protection from what we're seeing around us, which is increased physical and financial impacts of extreme weather brought on by climate change. And government, therefore, will need new tools to help it deliver on this pretty almighty responsibility. And one of those tools is obviously artificial intelligence. And I believe it can be applied in 3 areas for government, which I'll be talking about. The first is its use in the creation of climate policy to enforce the changes in behavior we need to see predominantly in industry and business, but also across society. The second is the public sector itself is a major owner or has responsibility for a huge estate of physical assets, buildings, infrastructure, etc. And effectively, it has to be in a position to manage its own operational resilience against climate. And the third is AI is very much a critical component of financial decision making in the financial markets. And I think that government, as a major investor in the economy and society through public spending, needs to make sure that it has got the same level of granularity as industries have in formulating climate embedded funding and budgets. Here's some predictions. I put these together because, you know, it's up for debate, but these are personal. I'm rather an optimist, but I am thinking back from 2030 and the various targets that we have in place in the next decade or so. I believe that a critical mass of public, governmental, and industry understanding is now culminating in understanding the size that we have, the challenge we have in front of us. And so we're moving from this kind of declaration and top-down strategy sort of modus operandi to more solutions. And we're seeing those solutions being coordinated across all levels, both inside and outside government. Firstly, technology itself is going to be providing in 2021 far more insights than it ever has done before to enable new approaches and solutions to climate change. Until now, I'd say one of the biggest problems is that no one has quite worked out the true cost of climate externalities. In other words, we haven't never really priced climate into our costs of production. And as a result of that, we're basically letting planet Earth give us a free ride. You know, the costs from fossil fuel consumption, environmental degradation, they're not built into the costs of producing goods that we all rely on. And therefore, we have to start thinking about that in terms of future costings of the processes, services, and goods that we all rely on every day. Secondly, I think we're approaching a point where the sheer scale and comprehensiveness and resolution and complexity of climate is finally being understood by artificial intelligence, because we haven't been able to grasp our minds around this huge system ever before. And I think we're getting to that point now. And lastly, I think that we're going to continue seeing a really strong drive, primarily through government, through regulatory pressure, to get everyone else to start thinking about this and be accountable to the way they produce services and deliver and consume. And I think that this is where government really needs to get a helping hand, because, of course, the tools that they will be using to be accountable to the regulations imposed by government are the same tools that government will need to use to scientifically create those regulations in the first place. And that's a really important point here. So I think these are the key predictions that I see that apply to this conversation today. And I think that we're going to have to really think about how climate can be measured and monitored, because the physical risk that we see from it is already locked in. And we're going to therefore have to start adapting based on what we've already seen in the system right now. I think government will be able to do this in three ways, and I kind of illustrated these at the top of the presentation. First, it has a responsibility to look at climate risk from the point of view of improving and imposing regulation out there, so that economies and society can basically conform to the targets that we have set down. The second is, let's think about the UK government as a national infrastructure owner and steward. It's imperative that our health, our defense, our national security and public infrastructure are all as mitigated against climatic disruption as possible. There can be no contingency, because we have to build that in. And so that is another important part of how AI can help. And thirdly, in order that governments can ensure that when it's actually plowing funding into various aspects of society, both nationally and regionally, it is thought through the climate component of that decision making. It is not just economic and social, but it's the climate risks as well, which obviously have a long-term bearing on those social and economic forecasts too. Here is, however, the challenges. We have these massive aspirations. We know that we've got targets, but bottom line is government needs to be helped in order to deliver on the huge and audacious targets that it's placed upon itself. I think across public and private sector, there are varying levels of climate intelligence readiness and sophistication and progress and commitments, just like there are across every other industry. You can't just say that government is climate ready, just like you can't say that financial services is ready. Different parts of it are more ready than others, but somehow we have to be able to harmonize that and bring everyone up into a more aggregated way. The second is that it's not enough to get to the so what, it's about how do we actually get to decisions through our artificial intelligence. I think we all have started to see the data that is telling us the problem, but turning that data into useful insights that then can drive decisions is absolutely what the government should be demanding of scientists and practitioners across the nation. And that's what we want to do to step up and help. I think it's really incumbent on everyone to realize that old mechanisms of data analysis haven't been sufficiently analytical to drive the level of granularity you need to do to measure Earth system level problems such as climate and how it affects us within our national borders. We can't just do this from the old way of data analysis. We have to think of new ways. And lastly, as drivers of data, surely the public sector must themselves be armed with the same data abstraction and interpretation capabilities as everyone else. Traditional technology, and I've been there, supposes that it's always the private sector that leads with the purchase and stress testing of new tech. We can't have that in climate. Government cannot be at the end of the bell curve of adoption. It has to be at the forefront. So we have to think logically about how we can do that and help government. So let's think now about how we can really help. I imagine the big problem, which is as follows. How can government understand its risk on every physical asset that it has sovereignty over, influence on, has trade relations through, in order that it basically safeguards society and the economy through better analysis, policy development, recommendations, and decisions? That's it for me. I am not a civil servant, but I'd like to think that that's the audacious thinking that could be solutions-based. And I think there are three things that are needed. There needs to be the ability to quantify risk at every scale possible, right down to the asset. There needs to be the ability to use probabilistic models to understand and really interpret multidimensional risks that hitherto we had no idea had connection with. And then we have to use data science to fill those gaps. Then lastly, we have to have a way in which the data that is being used is trusted, that you feel confident in, can be independently verified and standardized, so that at the end of the day, the humans at the end of the advice and guidance can make decisions knowing that they're not imperiling society, rather they're enabling them. So that's where I think Earth Science and Sylvest's own platform, which we're calling Earth Science AI, comes in. Now, we're a relatively new business. We're only 4 years old, but I think we're one of the new league of technologists that are really thinking about this problem. And so we've invested our entire 4.5 years on trying to bring together a fusion of mathematics, climate science, and technology to allow institutions, organizations, and governments to really get a handling of this. We use Bayesian machine learning as a way of harmonizing all these complex data sets that exist out there that no one had any clue about 5 years ago. We add those to our physical science domains to correlate these multivariable risks, such as meteorological, hydrological, natural hazard sciences, at the asset level, so that we can help the asset owner improve their knowledge of the asset's physical and material risk. And then we use cloud data infrastructure. It's really important that the computational power, the analytical power that is underneath this stuff can be truly scalable, because the size of the data crunching, quite honestly, is several order of magnitude greater than anything we've done before. We work with the likes of the Alan Turing Institute, Imperial College, to help with our academic research and peer reviews, because we want to get this right. AI is an ethical issue as much as it is a tool, and we want to get this right from the get-go. So we're launching something in the early new year called EarthScan. This will be basically the user interface, dashboard, if you like, that anyone will be able to use, because we don't believe that we want to monetize this from the get-go. We need to get millions of people, institutions and organizations really thinking about this and how it can help them. So we're going to just basically launch this platform. It'll have 600 million queryable assets that you can basically identify, over which you can then map your climate hazards and start to forecast out by between 1 and 30 years on those hazards, on the assets that matter to you, and pin those to the key climate scenarios that most of us working in predictive climate are looking towards. And we'll also be helping those initial testers to perform their own initial climate checks. In due course, we'll monetize this starting with the financial services sector, to really start giving them an addressable means of using our technology for financial disclosure and regulatory purposes. This is the UI. It's going to be very, very easy. We want it to be personalizable for any government asset and user. We want it to be shareable, so the licensing usage model will allow any user in any department to share their findings with any other user and or department across government.
Mark,
so yep.
Sorry to interrupt. Conscious of time.
I'm nearly there. I will just do
Great.
2 more slides. Yep. So I will, in fact, I'll skip the next one, but basically we will invite everybody to look at this UI and be able to start to interrogate their own asset climate risk. This is the slide I'll skip, but I will be sending this on because we believe that we're building tracks for government's longer term use of technology for climate risk. So in finishing, we are talking about the journey towards a climate intelligent government, a holistically thinking, fully integrated government where climate insights are embedded into all decisions to help with the wider, greater good that only government can help drive across society and our economy at large. I invite you to get in touch and let's see whether we can help you to assess your own assets for risk. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. I think you are doing a really, really great and ambitious work at Servest. I think we can just, conscious of time, introduce now Julia and Katie, who will talk through what is the mission of the Government Automation Task Force in the Government Office, and maybe provide a few examples of work they plan to undertake. And over to you, Julia.
It's Laura, sorry. Katie was meant to do it, but I'm doing it instead, so.
Okay.
Shall I share
hi.
my screen then?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. So while you do that, I'll just introduce myself. Yeah, I'm also very pleased to be here. Thank you for asking me. I'm going to talk quickly because I'm conscious that I want to leave a bit of time at the end for people to ask questions. I head up the Government Automation Task Force. I'm brand new, so please go gently with me on questions. And I'm joined today by Lara Hayes, who is a senior automation advisor within my team. I'm going to kind of take us back to basics in a way. The previous two presenters were presenting some really fascinating technology, but government, well, like many organisations in both the private and the public sector, there are always efficiencies to be made in terms of how that organisation operates its business critical processes and end user services. And this is especially true in complex, large organisations operating often on a legacy estate. Budget is often limited and often focus can be on running existing services as they are or building new services rather than continuously improving existing services. So over time, services and processes become inefficient. They're often manual and prone to errors as technology becomes outdated and processes and practices are not updated with changing business objectives. And arguably, some of government fits within that category, with the caveat that actually there are across all of the different departments, there will be varying levels of maturity. But recognising the problem and the potential opportunity for efficiencies and improvement, the Government Automation Task Force was created within Cabinet Office, and its mission is to support government departments to maximise the potential of automation to transform its services, improve outcomes, upskill its staff, and increase overall productivity. The way the task force intends to do this is through a central automation strategy and associated policies and frameworks to promote a consistent use of automation across government, by coordinating automation efforts across government and to facilitate sharing and leveraging of common solutions where possible, and to be the central go-to group for advice and guidance on automation and AI within government. Where have we got to on this journey? Well, as we were introduced, we are a relatively new team, but the team has been established. We've started to create and publish a number of products, including standards on ethics, transparency and accountability, and a process optimization model, but it's not limited to that. And we've also engaged with a large number of other government departments to understand their automation ambition, priority areas, and where the greatest areas for potential benefits are. So apologies, I've whizzed through that very quickly, but I'm now going to hand over to Lara, who will talk in a little more detail about some of the work that we've done.
Yeah, so it's good to kind of set out what we've done so far. We are a pretty new team, so we're still kind of finding our place in the world and in government. But so far, as Julia mentioned, we've produced standards on ethics, policy standards around automation. There's a key thing around the automation marketplace, so that's somewhere where tech providers can go to actually for them to be allowed to kind of trade with government. So it's kind of developing those. Sorry, I'm just seeing questions, I get distracted. Yeah, so tech providers can go to the marketplace to actually start bringing these things into government. There's stuff around so we track basically all the different that we can find, all the different automations across government to see how they're doing. We want to bring in some form of performance framework and stuff like that. And there's also, we deliver a few different programs or projects even within our team, which is one around potential automation in correspondence. There's also, as Julia mentioned, then we work to bring together departments to share best practice, which is why our first speaker today was really interesting to see how their Tech Nation and how they're sharing best practice around their and the organisations they work with. I'd probably like to carry on that conversation actually. So just to let you know, and I'll whiz through this super quickly, so sorry, I talk really fast anyway, so but basically recently we have asked departments to put together their 3-year plan around automation, and so I just want to touch on the key themes that have come out of these. One around departmental ambitions. A lot of the automation in government has been around robotic process automation, and that's stuff that's been done so far. But what we want to do and what departments are aiming to do is move to the kind of more, the stuff that we were hearing about at the beginning of the session, the kind of cool, more AI stuff, and the more kind of stuff that's easier digestible as well. But we do have to understand that, robotic process automation is a good start, and we have got kind of legacy systems that we need to deal with, and kind of we have to start maybe the stuff that isn't the kind of sexy stuff, basically. And then there's something around investment. In the current situation, budgets aren't, there isn't lots of money sloshing around or anything like that. So departments have identified what investment they can actually put towards this. And also there's a challenge around benefits and technology, so investing in the technology and separating what the actual automation benefits are through that. So that can always be a challenge. And then finally, that doesn't work like that. There's something around departmental capability. So whilst we've got some departments are really, really good at this. So Department for Education, for example, they've got a whole unit where they've brought in external people who've trained up people in automation kind of skills. And then these people that they've trained up have agreed to train other people up. So there's kind of and they basically, they agree to have one session with another member of staff to kind of raise their capability. But the reality is in some departments, they don't have particularly good capability building, and they don't have the skills that are needed. And that's at all levels as well, on awareness and culture as well. So this can be people knowing what kind of like parts of their job could be like, it could be kind of ripe for automation, the manual tasks, the ones they don't like doing. So they don't know that this kind of technology exists, and how to interact with their teams on automation. And yeah, as I mentioned, there's culture, and that's at the bottom, and also moving up to the top as well in the senior leadership, not maybe having as good understanding around automation as possible. So yeah, that's me whizzed through those slides. So I think we can open up to questions now.